Desert winds rising, a cowboy races to save an Apache warrior woman from ruthless pursuers. The sun hung high over the desert, turning the sand into a shimmering sea of gold. The wind blew with a sharp, biting edge, kicking up small clouds of dust that stung the eyes and clung to clothes and skin. Caleb rode steadily on his horse, a lean brown stallion with a coat that glimmered under the scorching sun. He had been traveling for hours, moving across the open plains in search of work at a ranch he had heard about from a passing traveler. The desert was quiet in a way that felt both beautiful and dangerous. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by the steady thump of hooves and the whisper of the wind through the rocks. Caleb had been riding alone for weeks now. He knew the desert's dangers better than most. Heat stroke, dehydration, rattlesnakes, and hidden ravines were all constant threats. Still, he felt alive here in a way he didn't anywhere else. The wide open spaces made him feel free, and yet the harsh conditions reminded him that freedom came with responsibility. He had learned early in life that patience and awareness were as important as courage. Every shift in the wind, every movement in the sand could signal danger or opportunity. As he crested a small rise in the dunes, something unusual caught his eye. A figure was running across the sand below, moving with a desperate speed that immediately drew his attention. At first, Caleb thought it might be some lost traveler, but then he noticed the group of men chasing her. They were mounted, riding hard and shouting as they spurred their horses forward. Dust rose behind them in thick clouds, and the sound of their hooves echoed against the canyon walls like thunder. The woman ran with determination, but her exhaustion was visible in the way her shoulders slumped and her feet stumbled over the uneven terrain. Caleb felt a jolt of urgency. Something in him would not allow him to turn away. Without a second thought, he urged his horse forward, galloping down the slope and across the sands toward the fleeing woman. He could see her face clearly now. A young Apache woman with dark, determined eyes and long hair that whipped behind her in the wind. Her expression was a mix of fear and fierce resolve. She looked back once and then forward again, calculating her chances, trying to find a path through the open desert that could help her escape. Caleb's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The pursuers were fast, but they were not familiar with the terrain. He knew the desert like the back of his hand. He could anticipate where rocks, hidden gullies, or sharp ridges might slow them down. Pulling his horse to the side, he created a sudden obstacle in their path. The lead pursuer had no choice but to swerve, and his horse stumbled slightly, giving the woman precious seconds to gain distance. Caleb shouted a warning, his voice carried by the wind, and the woman looked up sharply, startled by the sudden appearance of a stranger in the middle of her flight. "Follow me!" Caleb called, gesturing to a narrower path between two sandstone formations. His voice was urgent but controlled. There was no time for hesitation. The woman hesitated, her instincts warning her that strangers could be dangerous, but she had nowhere else to go. With a quick nod, she adjusted her pace and moved toward the path Caleb indicated. Together they ducked behind the jagged rocks, the pursuers' shouts echoing in the distance. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest, not from fear but from the intensity of the chase. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This was about saving someone else, someone he had just met, and every second counted. The two of them ran in near silence now, the sound of their own breathing and the pounding of hooves the only things filling the air. Caleb could see that the woman was skilled in survival. She moved with a careful balance of speed and caution, aware of the hazards around her. She was not just running blindly, she was thinking, observing, calculating. Caleb admired her focus and resilience. In that moment, he understood that this was no ordinary person. She was strong, brave, and determined to survive against overwhelming odds. The pursuers were relentless, their voices carrying over the wind as they closed the distance. Caleb knew that if they caught even a glimpse of the woman, they would not hesitate to strike. The desert offered little cover, but there were hidden paths, small depressions, and dry riverbeds that could be used to their advantage. Caleb guided her through these natural obstacles, pointing out paths that could slow down their pursuers. Each turn and hidden passage gave them just enough time to keep moving forward, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dust in the fading light of the afternoon. As they rode, Caleb learned small pieces of her story in brief, hurried words. She was Arya, an Apache warrior, and she was carrying something important, though she did not explain exactly what. Caleb understood enough to know that her life and perhaps the lives of others depended on their success in escaping the men chasing her. He did not ask questions beyond what was necessary. There was no time for unnecessary talk. His focus was on keeping them both alive. He could feel the weight of responsibility settle over him, but it was a responsibility he accepted without hesitation. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a vast expanse of sand, rock, and sky. Caleb noticed how the wind carried the scent of dry earth and sagebrush. The colors of the landscape shifted as the sun began to descend toward the horizon, painting the rocks in shades of orange, red, and gold. Shadows grew long and dark, giving them cover in some places but also creating potential hiding spots for danger. Every step of the journey required vigilance. Caleb's eyes scanned constantly, searching for threats and opportunities alike. He was aware that one mistake could cost him dearly. Hours passed as they navigated the desert, moving through narrow passes, climbing over rocky ridges, and following the natural contours of the land to avoid detection. Caleb could see that Arya's energy was waning. Sweat streaked her face, her legs trembled from exhaustion, yet she refused to slow down. He offered encouragement, small words of support, and she nodded, acknowledging them, trusting him more with each step. A bond was forming, fragile but significant. In the midst of fear and danger, a sense of shared purpose brought them together. Finally, as dusk approached, they reached a small area where the rocks formed a natural alcove. It was hidden from view and provided temporary shelter. Caleb guided the horses inside, letting them catch their breath while he and Arya took a moment to rest as well. The desert wind howled around them, but here in this small hollow, there was a brief sense of safety. They had survived the immediate threat, at least for the moment. Caleb watched Arya carefully, noticing the determination in her eyes and the faint signs of relief. He knew that the danger was not over, but they had taken the first crucial step in staying alive. As night fell over the desert, the stars appeared, one by one in the clear sky. Caleb and Arya sat silently, sharing a moment of quiet in the midst of chaos. The desert had tested them, and they had endured. There was understanding between them now, unspoken but real. Both knew that the road ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but for the first time since the chase began, there was hope. Caleb realized that sometimes survival was about more than skill. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. In the stillness of the desert night, Caleb felt a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. He had not sought out danger, but he had found it anyway, and in facing it, he had discovered something profound about himself. The desert winds continued to rise, swirling around them, carrying with them the promise of more challenges ahead. Caleb and Arya, though exhausted, knew that they had formed a bond that could carry them through whatever trials awaited. And so, with the stars above and the desert stretching endlessly before them, they prepared for the journey ahead, ready to face the unknown together. The first light of dawn crept across the desert, casting long shadows over the sand and rock. The wind, which had howled fiercely the night before, now whispered softly through the canyons, carrying the faint smell of sagebrush and dry earth. Caleb and Arya had spent the night in a hidden alcove, allowing their horses to rest and recover from the relentless chase. Though the darkness had provided some cover, neither had truly slept. Their minds were alert, scanning the desert for any sign of danger. The sun's slow rise revealed the vastness of the land, a mixture of jagged rocks, sweeping dunes, and narrow, twisting canyons. The desert was beautiful, but its beauty hid threats at every turn. Caleb mounted his horse first, checking the tack and reins to ensure everything was secure. Arya followed closely, her movements precise and steady, a sign of both skill and experience. She carried herself with the confidence of a trained warrior, yet there was an underlying tension that spoke of the fear she had felt during the chase. The desert had a way of wearing on a person, testing their endurance and patience. Caleb admired her resilience. He had seen many people struggle to survive in these harsh conditions. But Arya was different. She moved with determination, refusing to let exhaustion slow her down. "Stay close," Caleb said quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They won't give up easily." Arya nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She had no reason to trust Caleb at first, but his actions the day before had proven that he was willing to risk his life for her. Trust was a fragile thing in the desert, but necessity often forced people to rely on one another. Caleb's knowledge of the land, combined with her speed and awareness, gave them a chance to escape. Every step of the journey was crucial, and every decision could mean life or death. They began moving, riding side by side along a narrow ridge that overlooked a deep canyon. The terrain was treacherous. Loose rocks and sudden drops could easily throw an unsteady rider from their horse. Caleb pointed out the safest paths, guiding Arya with gentle words and subtle gestures. The desert demanded careful observation, and both of them had learned to read its signs. Shadows revealed hidden dips in the sand. Footprints hinted at the movements of others, and the wind carried distant sounds that might indicate danger. Every sense was heightened, and every moment required attention. As they rode, Arya spoke softly about her people and her mission.
She explained that she had been tasked with carrying important information to the elders of her tribe.
This knowledge was critical to protecting her people from a group of outlaws who sought to exploit their land and resources. She could not say much more, fearing that the pursuers would hear or that the knowledge might fall into the wrong hands. Caleb listened intently, understanding that her words carried weight beyond the immediate danger. The stakes were higher than he had first realized, and the desert suddenly felt even more perilous. Caleb adjusted his pace, keeping his horse steady while allowing Arya to match his speed. The desert was not kind to those who rushed blindly. He knew that their pursuers would be expecting a straightforward path, but the land offered hidden routes and narrow passages that could give them an advantage. Caleb led them through a series of twisting canyons, the walls rising high on either side and shielding them from sight. The echoes of distant shouts occasionally reached them, but the canyons distorted sound, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact location of the men chasing them. Every moment was a delicate balance between speed and caution. The journey was exhausting. Both Caleb and Arya had been riding for hours with only brief moments to rest their horses. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert sand into a radiant sheet that reflected heat in waves. Sweat streamed down their faces and the horses' flanks glistened with effort. Yet they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that stopping too long could be fatal. Caleb could see the determination in Arya's eyes, and it strengthened his own resolve. They were not just running from danger. They were fighting for survival, for a purpose greater than themselves. As they approached a narrow valley, Caleb noticed a faint trail of footprints in the sand. The tracks were fresh, and the direction indicated that their pursuers were getting closer. He slowed his horse and gestured for Arya to do the same. "We need to be careful here," he warned. "They've learned some of our path. We'll have to change course." Arya nodded again, her expression focused. She pointed to a small series of boulders nearby. "We can use those to hide," she suggested. "If we make a quick turn, they might lose sight of us." Caleb agreed, impressed by her quick thinking. Together, they veered off the main path, ducking behind the boulders and using the uneven terrain to their advantage. The pursuers rode past, not realizing they had been misled. For a moment, the desert fell silent again, and Caleb allowed himself a brief sense of relief. But there was no time to celebrate. The desert was vast, and the pursuers were relentless. Caleb knew they would regroup and continue the chase. He urged Arya forward once more, taking them through a series of hidden passes that only someone familiar with the land could navigate. The journey required endurance, skill, and courage. Every hill climbed, every ridge crossed, and every narrow passage taken brought them closer to safety. But the margin for error was razor thin. As the day wore on, the temperature climbed to a sweltering heat. Caleb and Arya took turns guiding their horses through patches of sparse shade, offering brief moments of water from small canteens. They were careful not to waste energy, knowing that the desert could be unforgiving. Arya's face showed signs of fatigue, but her eyes never lost their fire. Caleb spoke words of encouragement, telling her she was strong and capable, and she responded with a determined nod. Their bond grew in these quiet moments, a shared understanding forged in the heat of danger. By late afternoon, they reached a dry riverbed that wound through the desert like a silver ribbon. Caleb recognized it as a natural path that would allow them to move quickly while providing some cover. He guided the horses into the riverbed, keeping their movement low and steady. The walls of the riverbed created shadows that helped conceal them from sight. Caleb could hear the faint sound of distant shouts carried on the wind, reminding him that the chase was far from over. He tightened his grip on the reins and urged the horses forward, maintaining a pace that balanced speed with endurance. Arya glanced around, noting the changes in terrain and adjusting her movements accordingly. She spoke briefly about the dangers of desert travel, the sudden storms, hidden holes, and wildlife that could pose a threat. Caleb listened, realizing that her knowledge was as valuable as his own. Together, they navigated the twists and turns of the riverbed, avoiding obstacles and staying ahead of their pursuers. Every step was calculated, every decision intentional. They moved with a purpose, driven by the urgency of survival and the determination to see the journey through. As evening approached, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow across the desert.
Caleb and Arya paused on a small rise, taking a moment to rest and survey the land ahead. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a mixture of rolling dunes, jagged rocks, and winding canyons.
Caleb felt a deep respect for the woman beside him, for her courage and her skill. He realized that the bond between them was no longer just one of convenience. It was a partnership built on trust, shared danger, and mutual respect. Caleb pointed out a small cluster of rocks in the distance that could serve as temporary shelter. "We can make camp there for the night," he said. "It's hidden and gives us a good vantage point." Arya agreed, and together they guided their horses toward the formation. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the faint scent of distant flowers and dry earth. It was a moment of calm and an otherwise relentless journey. A brief pause before the next challenge awaited them. As they settled near the rocks, Caleb and Arya allowed their horses to rest and graze on the sparse vegetation. They shared a small meal, conserving their energy and supplies for the journey ahead. The desert was quiet, except for the occasional cry of a hawk or the distant howl of a coyote. Caleb felt a sense of cautious optimism. They had survived another day, and the bond between him and Arya had strengthened. Each challenge they faced together made them more determined, more aware, and more connected. Night fell, and the stars emerged in a brilliant display across the sky. Caleb and Arya sat quietly, listening to the wind and the desert around them. The chase had forced them to rely on each other, to trust one another in ways neither had expected. The journey was far from over, but for now they had found a moment of safety. The desert had tested them, and they had endured. In that quiet night, with the wind rising and falling like a living presence, Caleb and Arya knew that the challenges ahead would be difficult, but together they were ready to face them. The night air was cool, a relief from the scorching heat of the desert day, but it carried its own sharpness, brushing against Caleb's face and rustling the sparse brush around them. He and Arya had taken shelter in a small network of canyons, the walls towering above and creating shadows that twisted and moved with the rising moon. Their horses grazed quietly nearby, tethered to rocks, their flanks slick with sweat from the day's exertion. Caleb could hear the faint rustle of sand shifting in the wind, a sound both calming and eerie. The desert never truly slept.
It demanded attention, even in moments of temporary safety. Caleb settled near the edge of a rocky outcrop, glancing down into the canyon floor below.
It was a natural vantage point, allowing him to observe the area without being seen. He studied the patterns of the shadows, imagining how their pursuers might approach if they had tracked them here. The desert offered both protection and peril. Every hiding spot could become a trap if not chosen carefully. Every shadow could conceal an unseen threat. Caleb had learned to respect the land, to read its signs, and to use its features to his advantage. Arya sat nearby, tending to the small pack she carried. She was quiet now, her earlier energy and focus softened by exhaustion. The adrenaline from the chase had faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of her breathing and the occasional snort from the horses. She looked up at Caleb, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering moonlight. There was a strength in her gaze, a determination that seemed unshakable even in the face of danger. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "The desert tests everyone," she said. "But it also teaches you can't run forever." You have to know when to fight, when to hide, and when to move. Caleb nodded, impressed by her insight. He had learned much about survival over the years, but her words reminded him that experience could be a sharper weapon than any gun. And you've learned well, he replied. I'm glad you're with me. I don't think I could have gotten us this far alone. Arya gave a faint smile, acknowledging the compliment without letting her guard down. She had been taught from a young age that trust was precious, and that relying too heavily on someone else could be dangerous, but she also understood that sometimes survival required cooperation. Caleb had proven himself in the chase, and for the first time she allowed herself to consider that perhaps they could work together to face whatever lay ahead. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a faint sound that caught Caleb's attention. He froze, listening intently. There was a faint echo of hooves in the distance, far enough away that it could have been an animal, or it could have been their pursuers regrouping. Caleb signaled to Arya to stay quiet. They both lowered themselves slightly, keeping their movements minimal, blending with the shadows of the canyon walls. The desert was full of hidden dangers, and caution was their greatest ally. Hours passed slowly as they waited, the moon tracing a pale path across the sky. Caleb and Arya took turns watching the entrance to the canyon network, their eyes scanning for movement, their ears tuned to the slightest sound. They spoke in hushed tones when necessary, sharing observations about the terrain and possible escape routes. The bond between them continued to strengthen, built on shared danger and mutual respect. In the quiet of the night, they found a sense of camaraderie, each recognizing the value of the other's skill and determination. By the time the first light of dawn began to illuminate the canyon walls, Caleb and Arya had formulated a plan. They could not remain hidden indefinitely. The pursuers would eventually search the area thoroughly. Moving under the cover of shadows was no longer enough. They had to navigate the terrain carefully, using the canyon's twists and turns to their advantage. Caleb pointed to a narrow pass that led deeper into the canyon network, a path that required agility and knowledge of the rock's unstable surfaces. "We go through there," he whispered. "It's tight, but it will slow anyone chasing us. The rocks will give us cover and a chance to see them before they see us." Arya nodded, adjusting her gear and checking her footing. She moved with quiet confidence, her steps precise and deliberate. The canyon was unforgiving. One wrong step could mean a broken limb or worse. But she had been trained for this. Caleb followed, leading his horse carefully and ensuring that every movement minimized noise and risk. They moved as a team, silently communicating through glances and gestures, their awareness heightened by the knowledge that danger could strike at any moment. As they navigated the narrow pass, Caleb thought about the outlaws who had been chasing them. Their determination was clear. They would not stop until they had caught Arya or taken whatever it was she carried. But Caleb and Arya had an advantage that the pursuers did not: the desert itself. Every twist, every rock formation, every shadow was a tool they could use. They knew the land, respected it, and allowed it to guide them. The desert was both a challenge and a protector, a force that demanded respect but also rewarded those who understood it. Midway through the pass, Arya stumbled slightly, her foot catching on a loose rock. Caleb caught her quickly, steadying her and whispering words of reassurance. "Careful," he said. "The rocks are tricky here. One misstep and it could be dangerous." She nodded, grateful for his attention, and continued with renewed focus. The incident reminded them both that even the most experienced traveler could be caught off guard. Vigilance was their constant companion, and trust in each other was essential. By late morning, they emerged from the narrow pass into a wider area of the canyon network. Sunlight spilled into the space, revealing a small, hidden alcove surrounded by rock formations that offered protection from view. Caleb and Arya paused, letting their horses rest, and drank from a small trickle of water that pooled in a natural basin. The moment of respite allowed them to assess their situation. They were farther from the open desert, and the terrain offered a temporary shield from pursuit. But they both knew the danger had not passed. The outlaws were persistent, and they would continue searching. While resting, Arya spoke of her training as an Apache warrior.
She had been taught from a young age how to move silently, how to read the land, and how to anticipate threats. Every lesson she shared reminded Caleb of her skill and intelligence. He realized that she was not merely running to escape, she was strategizing, using every bit of knowledge she had to survive. Caleb, in turn, shared his own experiences traveling the desert, guiding horses through difficult terrain and reading the subtle signs that indicated danger.
Together, their knowledge complemented each other, creating a partnership built on skill, trust, and determination. As the day wore on, the desert heat rose, but the canyon walls provided some relief.
Caleb and Arya took turns keeping watch, allowing the other to rest briefly. They ate small portions of their supplies, conserving energy for the challenges ahead. The canyon, though protective, also reminded them of their vulnerability. The narrow paths, hidden crevices, and shifting shadows were both shields and potential traps. Every decision required thought. Every movement carried weight. Late in the afternoon, Caleb spotted faint footprints in the sand leading toward the alcove. He motioned for Arya to be silent and observed closely. The prints were fresh, and the direction indicated that someone had been near them recently, likely their pursuers, searching systematically through the canyon network. Caleb's heart raced, but he remained calm. He understood that panic could be deadly. He whispered a plan to Arya, outlining how they could use the rocks and narrow paths to their advantage if the men tried to follow. Together they moved carefully, using the shadows and uneven terrain to conceal their presence. Caleb led the way, ensuring that Arya remained unseen while she watched for any signs of the pursuers. Every step was deliberate, every pause calculated. The desert had taught them both patience, observation, and caution, and these lessons now became their lifeline. As night approached, they reached another small alcove, deeper within the canyon system. The rocks here formed a natural barrier blocking sightlines from above. They allowed the horses to rest and took a moment to breathe. The wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of distant desert plants and the faint echoes of animals moving in the darkness. Caleb looked at Arya, seeing in her eyes both exhaustion and unbroken resolve. They had survived another day, but the journey was far from over. In the quiet of the canyon, they shared a sense of accomplishment. They had used the land, their skills, and their wits to stay ahead of relentless pursuers. Each obstacle they had overcome strengthened their bond and sharpened their awareness. The desert, with all its beauty and danger, had tested them both, and they had endured. Caleb realized that survival was not just about strength or speed. It was about strategy, trust, and the ability to adapt. As night fell fully, the stars appeared above the canyon walls, bright and steady against the dark sky. Caleb and Arya settled near their horses, resting as much as possible while remaining alert. The desert was alive, full of movement and sound, and they knew they could not let their guard down. But for now, in this hidden alcove, they had a chance to recover and prepare for the next day's challenges. The journey continued, and with it their partnership grew stronger, forged in the fires of the desert and the trials of survival. The first light of dawn painted the desert in pale gold and soft pinks, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. The night had been quiet, but the silence was deceiving. Caleb and Arya had spent hours preparing, knowing the pursuers would not give up easily. The desert had tested them, taught them patience, and now it was time to face the next challenge head-on. Both were alert, every muscle ready for action, every sense heightened by the knowledge that the outlaws were close. Caleb scanned the canyon ahead, noting every rock, crevice, and ridge. He could see faint signs of movement in the sand below, shadows shifting unnaturally, broken stones displaced from where they had lain the night before. The pursuers were approaching, more determined than ever. Caleb whispered to Arya, outlining a plan. They would use the narrow canyon paths and natural obstacles to their advantage. The walls were high and jagged, perfect for hiding and forcing the outlaws into bottlenecks where speed and numbers would count for less. Arya listened carefully, her eyes scanning the terrain. She adjusted the straps of her pack and checked the placement of her gear. Every action was precise, practiced, and instinctive. Caleb admired her focus, realizing that her training as an Apache warrior gave them a critical edge. She had taught him patience, careful observation, and the value of using the land strategically. Now, those lessons would determine whether they survived this confrontation. The pursuers emerged from the shadows just as the sun broke fully over the horizon. Their horses kicked up clouds of sand, and their voices carried across the canyon in sharp shouts. They were relentless, a small group of hardened men who had pursued Arya with a single-minded determination. Caleb and Arya held their position, hidden behind a natural ridge of rocks that gave them both cover and a strategic advantage. They waited, breathing quietly as the outlaws drew nearer. Caleb signaled to Arya, pointing to a narrow pass where the canyon walls forced anyone entering to move in a single file.
"We can control the fight there," he whispered. "They'll have to come through one at a time, and we'll have the upper hand." Arya nodded, gripping her pack and steadying herself. They had both faced danger before, but this was different. The confrontation required not just courage but strategy, timing, and complete trust in each other. The first of the pursuers reached the pass, unaware of the trap awaiting them. Caleb waited until the man was fully inside the narrow path before moving. With a swift motion, he kicked loose a small boulder from above. It tumbled down the slope, landing with a crash that unbalanced the rider. The horse stumbled, and the man cursed loudly, struggling to regain control. The other outlaws hesitated, surprised by the sudden attack. Caleb and Arya seized the opportunity, moving quickly to create further obstacles. Loose rocks, narrow twists, and hidden dips forced the pursuers to slow and adjust, giving the pair critical time to defend themselves. Arya moved with agility and precision. She intercepted the second man, her movements swift and deliberate, using the narrow canyon walls to her advantage. She was small but formidable, striking with calculated force and retreating before he could react. Caleb covered her, his own movements fluid as he blocked and redirected the others. The canyon amplified every sound, the clash of boots against rocks, the shouts of the men, the frantic cries of the horses. The battle was intense but focused, each side using the terrain to its advantage. Caleb noticed the men were beginning to regroup, trying to flank them from both ends of the canyon. He shouted to Arya, and they both moved strategically, guiding the outlaws toward the section where the canyon walls created a sudden drop. Rocks and debris were already in place from the previous night, and Caleb had prepared this natural trap carefully. As the outlaws charged forward, several stumbled over the obstacles, losing their balance and forcing the group to pause. Caleb and Arya took advantage, pushing forward with speed and precision. Despite the intensity of the confrontation, both remained focused and disciplined. Caleb's knowledge of the land allowed him to anticipate the pursuers' movements, while Arya's training enabled her to act quickly and decisively. The canyon became a controlled battlefield, where every movement had meaning and consequence. The outlaws were skilled and persistent, but the advantage lay with Caleb and Arya, who knew the terrain and could use it to turn the tide. The fight continued for what felt like hours, though the sun had already risen high into the sky. Caleb and Arya remained calm, moving in tandem, their strategies complementing each other perfectly. Every rock, every shadow, every twist of the canyon became a tool in their hands. The pursuers were frustrated, their confidence shaken by the unexpected resistance. They had assumed the chase would be easy, that the woman would be caught quickly. Instead, they faced two determined individuals who refused to yield. At a critical moment, one of the outlaws attempted to take a shortcut over a higher ridge to flank them. Caleb acted immediately, throwing a small rock down to startle the horse. The animal bolted, causing its rider to lose balance and tumble. Arya moved swiftly, blocking the remaining man from advancing further. Their actions were precise, efficient, and coordinated. Neither wasted energy, knowing that the desert could not be endured indefinitely. Finally, after a tense and exhausting confrontation, the outlaws began to retreat. They had underestimated the pair, misjudged the terrain, and been forced into a battle that drained their strength. Caleb and Arya watched carefully as the men slowly withdrew, their figures disappearing over the distant ridges. Though victorious, the sense of relief was tempered by the knowledge that more challenges could come. The desert was unpredictable, and survival required constant vigilance. Caleb and Arya allowed themselves a brief pause to breathe, their hearts still racing from the intensity of the fight. They checked on their horses, giving them water and small amounts of food, and ensured that their gear remained secure. Both were bruised and tired, but neither showed signs of giving in. Their bond had strengthened further through the confrontation, each recognizing the value of the other's skill, courage, and calm under pressure.
Arya spoke softly, her voice steady but tinged with fatigue.
"We did it," she said. "But we can't stay here. They may regroup, and others could be coming." Caleb nodded, understanding her concern. Victory in the canyon was only temporary. The desert offered no permanent refuge. They needed to keep moving, to stay ahead of any remaining threat, and to continue their journey to safety. They carefully planned their next steps, choosing a route that would take them deeper into the canyon network while providing cover from distant observation.
Every movement was deliberate, every decision strategic. Caleb and Arya had learned to trust each other implicitly, relying on instinct, experience, and mutual understanding. The confrontation had tested them physically, mentally, and emotionally, and they had emerged stronger and more unified. As they moved forward, the sun climbed higher, casting sharp light across the rocks and sand. Caleb could feel the warmth on his skin, a reminder of the harshness of the environment. He adjusted his hat and reins, focusing on the path ahead. Arya remained close, her eyes scanning for danger, her movements precise and controlled. They were a team now, connected by shared struggle, and both understood that the desert had not finished testing them. By mid-morning, they reached a small alcove overlooking a wider stretch of the desert. From this vantage point, they could see for miles, and Caleb used the opportunity to plan their route carefully. The terrain ahead was rugged but navigable, offering natural cover and potential escape routes. They would need to move quickly, balancing speed with caution, but Caleb felt a renewed sense of confidence. Together, they had faced danger, outsmarted their pursuers, and survived. The desert wind blew strongly across the alcove, carrying with it the scent of dry earth, sage, and distant vegetation. Caleb and Arya allowed themselves a moment to appreciate the vastness of the land and the beauty hidden within its harshness. But there was no time for complacency. The confrontation had proven that their enemies were determined, clever, and dangerous. Survival required constant awareness, and the journey was far from over. Caleb glanced at Arya, noting the faint lines of exhaustion on her face, but also the unbroken determination in her eyes.
"We've made it this far," he said quietly. "We can keep going." "We just have to stay smart and stay together." Arya nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning of his words. The desert had tested them, but it had also taught them resilience, strategy, and trust. Together, they would continue their journey, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As they prepared to move on, the desert seemed to breathe around them, alive with movement and sound. The wind rose and fell, carrying whispers of past travelers, shifting sands, and distant wildlife. Caleb and Arya, united by shared struggle and mutual respect, mounted their horses once more. They rode out of the alcove, ready to navigate the next stretch of the desert, aware that each step could bring new danger but also new opportunities for survival. The confrontation at dawn had ended, but the journey was far from over. Caleb and Arya moved forward with renewed purpose, strengthened by their experience and ready to face whatever the desert and their pursuers might throw their way. Every shadow, every ridge, and every gust of wind was a reminder that survival demanded courage, intelligence, and trust in one another, and together they were prepared to endure it all. The desert stretched endlessly before Caleb and Arya, the sun high and bright in the sky, casting shimmering waves of heat across the sand. After the intense confrontation at dawn, they had moved steadily through the winding canyon network, careful to avoid any signs of the pursuers. Both were tired, their muscles aching from hours of riding and navigating rough terrain, but there was a quiet determination between them now. The adrenaline that had carried them through danger had faded, replaced by a sense of purpose and a growing trust in each other. Caleb guided his horse carefully, scanning the land ahead. They had heard stories from travelers of a hidden Apache village tucked deep within the desert, a place where outsiders rarely ventured and where the people lived in harmony with the land. It was their destination now, a place of refuge where Arya's mission could be completed, and where they could finally rest without fear of immediate pursuit. The journey had been long and grueling, but the thought of reaching safety gave them renewed energy. Arya rode close beside him, her eyes alert, still scanning for any movement in the distance.
Though they had successfully evaded their pursuers during the morning confrontation, the desert had a way of hiding dangers that could appear suddenly. She adjusted her pack, ensuring that the items she carried remained secure. She had learned to move efficiently through the desert, balancing speed with caution, and Caleb recognized that her skills had been vital to their survival. Together they moved with a careful rhythm, each respecting the other's experience and instincts. The terrain began to change subtly as they rode. The wide dunes gave way to rocky ridges, and the scent of vegetation became faintly noticeable in the warm air. Small clusters of scrub and wildflowers appeared sporadically, and Caleb felt a quiet sense of relief.
This was a sign that water and life were near, a reassurance that their destination was approaching.
Arya's expression softened slightly, a rare moment of relief showing through her usual focus. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had tested them, but it had also guided them to this point. As they rode, Arya spoke quietly of her people and their traditions. She described the ways in which her tribe had survived in the desert for generations, using knowledge of the land, the stars, and the seasons to find water, hunt, and protect themselves. Caleb listened intently, fascinated by her stories and the wisdom embedded in them. He realized that this journey was about more than evading danger. It was also about understanding a culture deeply connected to the land they traveled. Her words gave him a new appreciation for the desert, its challenges, and its beauty. By late morning, they spotted smoke rising faintly in the distance. Caleb's heart lifted. He pointed to the horizon.
"That's got to be it," he said. "The village must be there."
Arya nodded, her eyes brightening with anticipation. She had carried vital information for her people, and the completion of her mission was near. The sight of the village gave them a clear goal, a tangible endpoint to the grueling journey. Their pace quickened, but carefully. There was no room for mistakes, even at this late stage. As they approached the village, the structures became visible. Small adobe homes clustered together, surrounded by natural barriers of rock and desert brush. Children ran through the open spaces, laughing, while elders tended to small gardens. Horses grazed nearby, and the sounds of daily life filled the air.
The village was hidden well enough to remain protected from outsiders, yet open and welcoming to those who were trusted. Caleb felt a sense of awe at the sight, understanding the strength and resilience of a community that thrived in such a challenging environment. Upon entering the village, Arya was quickly recognized by the elders.
They had been expecting her, aware of the danger she had faced. Relief and gratitude were evident on their faces as they welcomed her back. Caleb followed respectfully, his presence acknowledged but secondary to the reunion. Arya quickly shared the information she had carried, explaining how it would help protect the village from the outlaws and ensure the safety of her people. The elders listened intently, nodding in understanding and appreciation. Their expressions reflected the relief of knowing that a threat had been averted. Caleb observed quietly, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. He had played a role in ensuring Arya's safe return, but the true strength lay in her courage, skill, and determination. She had carried a heavy responsibility, and she had fulfilled it against extraordinary odds. The elders expressed their thanks to him as well, recognizing the bravery it took to act in defense of another, especially in such a harsh and unforgiving environment. Caleb felt a sense of connection forming with the village, a quiet acknowledgement that his journey through the desert had brought him to something meaningful. As the day progressed, Caleb and Arya took time to rest. The horses were tended to and fed, and both riders drank deeply from cool water, savoring the relief after days of limited resources. The village offered a sense of safety that was entirely new to them. Caleb could see the ways in which the community thrived, how each person contributed to survival and security, and how respect and cooperation maintained harmony. Arya's pride in her people was evident, and Caleb admired her deep sense of loyalty and responsibility. Over the next few hours, Caleb and Arya walked among the villagers, learning more about their daily lives and the strategies they used to survive in the desert. They observed food preparation, water collection, and protective measures against potential threats. Caleb asked questions, eager to understand the customs and skills that had allowed this community to endure for generations. Arya answered carefully, proud of her heritage and willing to share the wisdom that had kept her people safe. Together, they discovered a quiet joy in the simplicity and effectiveness of life in the desert. As evening approached, the elders invited Caleb to stay with the community, offering him a place among them. He hesitated briefly, considering the journey he had already undertaken and the life he had lived as a wandering cowboy. But he realized that this was an opportunity to be part of something larger than himself, a chance to connect with people who had endured hardship, respected the land, and valued courage and trust. Caleb accepted, understanding that his path had brought him here for a reason. Arya smiled at him, her expression a mix of relief and quiet pride. Their journey had forged a bond that went beyond simple cooperation. It was rooted in shared struggle, mutual respect, and a deep understanding of each other's strengths. The desert had tested them, taught them, and ultimately brought them to this moment of safety and possibility. Caleb felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before, a recognition that the trials of the journey had shaped him as much as they had protected Arya. Night fell over the village, and the stars emerged in brilliant clarity against the dark desert sky. Caleb and Arya sat quietly together, listening to the soft sounds of the community settling in for the night. The wind moved gently through the canyons and brush, carrying the scent of dry earth, sage, and distant flowers. They reflected on the journey they had undertaken. The chase across the desert, the confrontation with the pursuers, and the challenges that had tested every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of courage. Each obstacle had been a step toward this moment, a step toward safety, understanding, and connection. Caleb realized that his life had changed. The desert, which had always been a place of challenge and solitude, had become a place of learning, connection, and purpose. Arya had taught him more than he had anticipated, about survival, strategy, culture, and courage. And in return, Caleb had provided protection, support, and partnership. Together, they had navigated the harshest elements of the desert and emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. In the days that followed, Caleb became part of the community, learning from the elders, assisting with tasks, and sharing stories of the desert beyond the village. He developed a deeper understanding of Arya's people, their resilience, and the careful balance they maintained with the land. Arya continued to play her role as a warrior and protector, but now with Caleb by her side as a trusted ally and friend. Their experiences had taught them both the value of trust, preparation, and courage, lessons that would remain with them long after the desert winds had settled. The desert winds continued to rise and fall, shifting sand, bending brush, and carrying distant sounds across the vast landscape. Caleb and Arya stood together on a ridge overlooking the village, watching as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting warm golden light across the adobe homes and surrounding canyons. They knew the desert was unpredictable, that challenges could arise at any time, but they also knew that together they were capable of facing whatever came their way. Their journey had been perilous, but it had also been transformative, shaping both their skills and their hearts. As the stars emerged once more in the deep night sky, Caleb and Arya looked at one another with quiet understanding. They had survived the desert, evaded ruthless pursuers, and reached safety. More importantly, they had discovered a bond forged in adversity, respect, and shared purpose. The journey was over, but the lessons would remain. The desert had tested them, but had also revealed the best within them, and as the night winds whispered across the sands, Caleb and Arya knew they had found not only refuge, but also a new path forward, one of connection, courage, and hope for the days ahead.